I've reached the summit. I've finished Aristotle. Is Aristotle finished with me? The Aristotle reading project is complete. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jim. I've made a concerted effort starting 10 years ago to read all of Aristotle's works as presented here in the Great Books of the Western World set. And late last year, I finished volume 1. That took me about 10 years to get through. And then I tackled volume 2, I think starting in December, roughly. And I thought it was going to take me until springtime to get through these. But I plowed through this in like a month and a half. And I am thrilled, I'm elated to be on the other side of Aristotle. It helps that in this volume, I was able to skip several major works that I have read elsewhere. So that included the Nicomachean Ethics, the Poetics, and the Poetics. So in this volume, I could get through it faster, but still it was a few hundred pages of double column text to get through. So what I focused on in this volume were the biological treatises and the Athenian Constitution and the rhetoric, which I'd never read the full rhetoric before now. And I could get through those in short order. Some of this was due to a little bit of speed reading, I admit, especially with the biological treatises. Once I could get the gist of what he was observing in a chapter, I would do some speed reading, like hard skimming, but really trying to pay attention to what he was saying, but not like worrying too much about like retaining everything. It was more just getting the gist of what he was doing in those books. I did read the Athenian Constitution and the rhetoric more closely. The Athenian Constitution isn't really all that long. Rhetoric is a little bit longer, but I allowed myself the license to move sometimes at a faster pace because Aristotle can get quite long-winded. But in this video, I want to share my overall impressions of reading this body of work and reflect upon the impact that Aristotle has had on my thinking and some of his cultural legacy as well, intellectual legacy. So what I want to do now is a rundown of each volume and give you some quick takes on what I found in there. Okay, let's do a quick scrub through the books in Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the works of Aristotle, and I'll give you some quick takes on what I can recall and what my impressions were of these works. The logic books, these took me forever to get through, and I didn't pick up a whole lot from them, but I will say, like, categories and on interpretation were somewhat meaningful. Like, to really think, like, thinking as thinking in categories, and also how do we form propositions. So a lot of on interpretation was about grammar and kind of like subjects and predicates and predication and postulates and kind of putting things into statements like that. That just all seemed very fundamental to me. Even though I didn't fully understand it. The analytics treatises were really getting down into the weeds of things, but you're talking about like syllogisms and different kinds of reasoning, and it was heavy lifting, to say the least. Same for the topics and on sophistical refutations. Once I got through logic, also known as the organon, I actually took more interest in physics. I liked that book more than I thought I was going to, because he really gets into some very primary views of things. Talking about time and motion and infinity and things like that, like really deep philosophical ideas that have been built upon ever since. On the heavens, on generation and corruption, on meteorology, showing sort of more of his scientific interests. They were of like casual interest to me, although so many of his observations have been superseded. Metaphysics I didn't like as much as I wanted to, and I tried as my best to follow it, and I don't think I did the very best job of it, but I might come back to that someday and take another run at it. In these books, he's really developing his idea of like the four causes, like the final cause and the formal cause, the efficient cause and the material cause. And he's kind of working that through, leading him up to the work on the soul, which was a shorter work. I thought it was more digestible than metaphysics, even though I didn't fully, buy into it. The short physical treatises were of some interest as well. They didn't take me as long to get through. And here he's treating what I would call more like psychological themes on the whole, and some interesting reflections. You can think of these as like shorter essays. As for volume 2, I read the biological treatises, which was, about 300 some odd pages of Aristotle being very encyclopedic, observing all the different kinds of animals, from humans to mammals to birds and fish and snails and insects and bees and all this, trying to make sense of all that. And he's very interested in anatomy and on how animals move through space, and also how they reproduce. So there's a lot in here about sex, copulation, mating, and he's kind of inching his way up towards discussions of genetics and so forth, but he can't quite get there. We didn't get to genes and heredity and that kind of thing until the 19th and 20th centuries. Aristotle didn't know one thing about DNA, for instance. Like we've only known that for less than 100 years. But it's interesting to see him grapple with trying to understand the natural world. He's definitely interested in it, and I was just shocked at how encyclopedic this was. Nicomachean Ethics and Poetics I skipped over because I've read them before. I really like ethics quite a bit. Politics didn't grab me quite as much, but it's an important sort of theory of how human beings organize themselves into political, how they organize political power. Things like oligarchy and aristocracy and democracy and tyranny and whatnot. Athenian Constitution I did read just recently, and that was fun to see his take on Athenian history. There was definitely like the first almost half of that book was taking through like the history of rulers in Athens, and from the archons and through Solon and up through the democratic period and all the reforms and the sort of how they kept changing their forms of government and adapting it as time shifted. Takes you through the Peloponnesian War and the rule of the 30, the tyrants, and then he gets into the 4th century Athens, more his contemporary period, and he really does a deep analysis of like the structure of their government, which was maybe a little more detailed than I needed, but people who are students of the history of Athens and of constitutional forms of government, I think would benefit from studying that work. Rhetoric is really my wheelhouse in terms of teaching writing, composition, public speaking and that sort of thing. And this was the first time I went through the whole thing. I had only read selected chapters before, and I thought it was pretty beneficial. Sometimes it was more detailed than I needed, but it was amazing how much of rhetoric still persists today. Like we still use these terms. And like he talks about how to organize a speech, and you got your introduction and your epilogue, and here's what you do for your argument, and these kinds of. We basically teach versions of these things to this day, and also the whole theory of like your rhetorical appeals. You can use the logical, the logos appeal, like appeal to people's reasons, like reasoning powers of logic. You can appeal to them on an emotional level. That's the pathos appeal. And the ethical appeal, or ethos, is where if you portray yourself as a person of good character, you're more likely to be credible and more persuasive to your audience. And it was also interesting to see how he wove so many of his other works into rhetoric. So, you get a little mini ethics, and you get some mention of politics, and definitely references to his logic books. On Poetics, I could skip because I've read it before. This is his great work on literary theory, talking a lot about poetry and tragedy especially. So, I was really shocked at how quickly I could get through volume 2. I really was motivated. I just wanted to plow forward. I was ready to be done. And that's Aristotle, volume 2. Okay, now that we've done a run through of all the treatises in those 2 volumes, let me give you my list of essential Aristotle books, the ones that I'm most likely to revisit someday. And I guess I'll be presumptuous and say these are the ones I think a general reader who's casually interested in Aristotle might want to go with. So I would say, as far as the logic and the physical treatises and metaphysics, you can probably do pretty well by just maybe reading secondary sources on Aristotle about those. Find a good book about Aristotle, someone who's good at introducing him, and see what they have to say about those books, and then decide if you want to dive deeper into it. I thought On the Soul was a pretty important work, even though I didn't entirely buy what he was saying. I think it's short. It'll give you a good sense of how Aristotle's applying his theories and thinking systematically about things, and it gives you a lot of food for thought. The short physical treatises, those were kind of good too. Are they essential reading? I'm not sure, but they aren't that difficult to read, and again, it'll give you a flavor for how Aristotle's thinking about things like psychology. And then if we go into the volume 2 works, I would say the essential ones for me would not be the biological treatises, but Nicomachean Ethics for sure, and Poetics below that, but I would say that's pretty close to essential reading. I think Ethics is more important. Athenian Constitution was, I don't know if it's essential. I think you could read about that work and be fine, although it's not that long. So if you have a tolerance for Aristotle, why not? You will learn, if you're interested in history at all, the history of Athens, I think that is essential. Rhetoric, I think you could read about rhetoric without having to dive through the whole thing, to be honest. And Poetics is a shorter work. I consider that an essential work. I'm being subjective here because I'm interested in literature, and you have to grapple with Poetics, and it's when we talk about things like catharsis and tragic flaws, like all that comes out of Aristotle, right? So I would consider that essential reading. Of all the works of Aristotle, which was my favorite, or the one that I think is the most essential, the most lasting? Just speaking personally, the one I keep coming back to is the Nicomachean Ethics. I think that is a very important work, and anyone who's thinking about ethics really needs to work through that text and learn about virtue ethics. So here are my overall impressions of Aristotle, just some kind of random thoughts and feelings as I reflect on this pretty massive reading project. I have massive respect for Aristotle. Like, this man had a prodigious intellect. He was interested in everything, it seems, and he has meaningful things to say about every topic he touches. I also think of him as our first major scientific philosopher. There were others who preceded him amongst the Greeks, but he probably did it best. He improved on the work that had come before him, and he really jumpstarts a scientific way of thinking about the world, which is in stark contrast to Plato, his more idealistic approach to things. And you can kind of go down the Platonic path or the Aristotelian path. Those two don't always meet, but maybe there's some interesting ways that you can synthesize them. I don't think they're like totally opposed to one another, but they're disposed differently from one another. And this is where science really starts, in my opinion. This may be one of Aristotle's greatest legacies. He teaches us to observe our world, to catalog it, to categorize, classify it, improve on prior theories that attempted to understand the world in order to attain a better understanding of how the world works. What is this thing called nature, and where are we? Who are we? What's our place in it? How does this all fit? From the body to the mind to the soul, it's all covered in Aristotle's work. Aristotle is very much a systematic thinker. That is a big takeaway for me. He's constantly cross-referencing his own work too. So it's clear that this man had a vision and a mission to, like, okay, I'm going to try to explain everything, and I'm going to show you how it all fits together. So the cross-referencing is like this sort of ancient Greek Wikipedia where everything kind of links to something else, and he'll literally say in the text, refer to my chapter in Poetics about this. So he's always carrying over his theories and applying them from one discipline to another. So, for example, his insights, some of his insights about logic carry over into his rhetoric. So he says, I talked about syllogisms in my logic books, and now we're going to put those into practice in the form of enthymemes in rhetoric, in public speech and writing. Or his treatise on physics carries over into his treatise on metaphysics, and that carries over into his work on the soul. And he's sort of finding ways to weave these all together into like a pretty consistent train of thought. His concept of the four causes, the final cause, formal cause, material cause, efficient cause, he does a lot of cross-referencing of that as he works through his books on metaphysics, for example, and it shows up a lot in the biological treatises as well. So you really get the overall impression that he's making a worldview, he's constituting it, that something that's coherent and integrated. Now, the big question is, was he right about any of this, or how much of this was he right about? And that's something that, we would have to think about for a long time. I feel like much of the time his work continues to have some validity and applicability, but much of the time, no, his work has been superseded, it's been improved upon. Especially the more scientific themed treatises. But, even like his metaphysics, I think, we've maybe made some progress in terms of like improve. I shouldn't use the word improving, but, you know what I'm driving at, like kind of giving a different take on the meaning of all that. I feel like his books on logic, even though I am a bit of a moron and I only have a smidgen of understanding of those books, we still have to reckon with that. I would imagine people can tell me in the comments, is Aristotle being taught still in logic classes? I mean, we still teach them in rhetoric when I teach composition and writing, and you talk about rhetorical theory. I mean, Aristotle comes up all the time, and the same in literary criticism. So his book on the Poetics, as I said before, it's a standard text. It's sort of where literary criticism starts. And same for politics. I mean, people in the political science discipline, they're going to be talking about his politics for sure. So, there's a through line. He's still a fundamental thinker that we have to come to terms with at some level. But the big takeaway for me really is just a sense of relief. I'm glad I got through all this Aristotle. Boy, did it take a long time. And I probably read even like this 10 years of reading a lot of this stuff. Like some of the other books I skipped over, I read them like earlier than that. Like, so you really tack on more years of living with Aristotle. And it was not easy. I just have to be perfectly honest. Like many readers, if you buy a book or borrow a good book about Aristotle, a couple good books about Aristotle, you can probably get a pretty good hold. But I always am a fan of trying to go back to the texts and try to come to terms with him, like on your own terms, just through that direct engagement with the writer. And he's worth the effort, but I don't know if I would recommend everyone to read everything. But although it wasn't easy, I am glad I went through it for a few reasons. One is he's such a foundational thinker. How can you understand developments in medieval philosophy, like the work of Thomas Aquinas, who's attempting to synthesize Christian doctrine with Aristotelian ideas? You can't even you really have to put the cart before, you can't put the cart before the horse. Aristotle's the horse. And Aquinas coming in after that to make use of Aristotle. So you really have to encounter Aristotle first, I think. He's more of a primary thinker that way. To some degree, and again, this is out of my field, but historians of science, I would imagine they should reckon with his biological treatises and his works on meteorology and on the heavens and physics. And how he observed nature, how he cataloged nature, and compare that to how we do that in this day and age. So I think there's in a more historical sense, those works are important to scientists. As mentioned before, literary critics still find relevance in his work on poetics. Teachers of composition and public speaking. I think there's a lot of value in his book on rhetoric. He's foundational to those disciplines as well. And his virtue ethics, as expressed in Nicomachean Ethics, has held up quite well. It's one of the main branches of ethical theory. So people are still talking about Aristotle. Foundational is the message here. He's a foundational thinker. So my recommendation is read some of them at the very least. If you don't want to tackle it all, I completely understand. Sometimes I wonder if this project was worth it. But I'm glad I can say I slogged through it. And I do think something rubbed off. Another aspect here that I want to talk about is the reception history of Aristotle. So, he was big in his own time, and then he faded into obscurity. But his work much of his work did get preserved thanks to the Muslim scholars during the Middle Ages. And then those manuscripts feed back in through Western Europe in the later Middle Ages and get massively revived
in the scholastic movement of philosophy, medieval philosophy, Christianity's encounter with Aristotle, and trying to make that all fit. Also, the Renaissance is reintegrating a lot of Aristotle, so he has this second, third life, and he kind of goes away for a while and he comes back. That's really fascinating to me, how those things can happen. So we can't seem to shake Aristotle, can we? Much as we like to think we've moved way past him, he keeps popping up, maybe like a whack-a-mole. I'm not sure, but he's still in there, exerting some influence across the board. But that being all said, my main feeling is one of relief. I really am happy to have summited this mountain, and now I'm kind of going down the other side, and I want to see what's on the other side and get down in there. So Aristotle is not my favorite philosopher by a long shot. I'm speaking entirely subjectively here. This is more a matter of my own taste than the substance of his thought. The fact is, one problem we have with his writing style is the bulk of the surviving work is really what constitutes something like lecture notes. And, we don't have a performative writing style. We don't have the dazzling style that we find in much of Plato's dialogues, which read like little dramas almost. They're really insightful conversations that Socrates has with his interlocutors. Aristotle is not a literary philosopher, and I must confess those are the kinds of philosophers I like to read the best, are the ones who are the best writers. So Aristotle is a very clear writer, he's very organized, he's very systematic, but he's not a lot of fun to read. And I don't want to blame him for that. But apparently Aristotle wrote dialogues, but these have not survived. Wouldn't we love to read some of his dialogues? Maybe he was a really good writer, but that stuff just didn't make it down through the ages. I'm not sure. If people know more about the dialogues of Aristotle, let me know in the comments. But the good news is I'm done with them, and I'm ready to move ahead. And now I have a point of reference to look back upon. Things are going to, and just in terms of my being able to synthesize information, I feel like I know Aristotle a lot better than I did before. Now, the other thing is, I think this gives me the opportunity to unhaul this book. This is a Heritage Press edition in a slipcase of Aristotle's Poetics and Poetics. And I want to show this to you on the document cam, and just talk a little bit about, before I get rid of it, I just kind of want to document this book and talk a little bit about why I feel like I'm able to give it up now. Alrighty, let's take a gander at this Heritage Press edition. Comes with a sandglass insert, issued monthly to members of the Heritage Club in New York, number 11, or volume 11, number 29. And always good to have those. So many of the Heritage Press books, you will find those if you come across these in a used book shop. Okay, now this I have not read. I read Politics and Poetics in different editions. Illustrator here is Leonard Baskin, and our translators here are Benjamin Jowett and S.H. Butcher. So the Politics translated by Jowett, that's the same translator as Great Books of the Western World. S.H. Butcher is a different translator. We have an introduction by Horace Collin, which I might read before I give this away. It's short. And then Portraits by Leonard Baskin. And the date of publication is 1964. Now, what I have found with these Heritage Press books is by this 1960s, I think by this point, George Macy had passed away, and he had a lot of involvement with overseeing these titles that were released. And then I think his family, maybe it was his wife, who kind of continued the business, and possibly sons or daughters. And up until the point at which Heritage Press, they were kind of, I'm going to say, bought out by Easton Press. I think the quality of the books goes a little downhill. Not that they're bad editions at all. This is very nice. But some of the finer points, they just don't have quite the appeal for me as some of the earlier Heritage Presses. Now, there are exceptions to that. But this one, typography looks great. I'm totally fine with that. And we've got a linen cover, which terracotta reproductions of a Greek ornament, which is used in the book as well. So, some thought went into the design here. Usually they tell you what the typeface is too. Yes, it's they use the typeface Bembo 14 point. A solid typeface. So there's our introduction. And okay, what you might wonder, like, how would they try to illustrate Aristotle? So I guess what the illustrator's plan here was to depict different figures from Greek culture. So Aeschylus, Aristotle, Aristophanes, Cleisthenes, Demosthenes, Dionysius the Elder, Euripides, Herodotus, Hesiod, Homer, Pericles, Plato, Socrates, Solon, Sophocles, and Thales. And, that's what they look. They're nice. They're nice illustrations. This is Hesiod. This is nice. Nice drop caps. These editions do have some sidebar notes, which is nice. Here's an illustration of Herodotus. The paper feels a little thick to me, like not quite as supple as I would prefer. But you can see it's really clean. Let's get to the illustration. Here's Solon. As nice as these drawings are, that's a cool one on Thales. They don't quite pop as much as some of the other Heritage Press illustrations. Euripides, Homer. These are figures who may be mentioned in these works, but they're not really illustrating concepts in the book. Pericles, Dionysius, Demosthenes, Cleisthenes, Socrates. I like that one. Plato, Aristophanes, Aeschylus, Sophocles. Yeah. Where was Aristotle? Let's find Aristotle's portrait. Oh, he's on the frontispiece. There's Aristotle. We'll end with that. So I think I can give away this one. As nice as it is, I have plenty of Aristotle in my great book set, and I think this plus its slipcase, I will donate to my local used bookshop, charity shop, and someone's gonna discover it and I think get more value out of it than I will. Well, I guess it's time for the ceremonial reshelving of Aristotle's volume 1 and 2. Now that I'm done with it, I'm going to put these back on the great bookshelf. Yeah, momentous occasion. Done. Bye-bye, Aristotle. Onward to other books in the great book set. Thanks for watching. Please comment, and hope you like and subscribe to the channel. But always interested to hear what you have to say about these books, these authors, these themes, and tell me what you think. And we'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.